All right, we should be live on Facebook right now. Welcome everyone to the Elul and Chagim Shiur webinar series. My name is Rivka Cohen. I am the new program manager at JOFA. This webinar series is a collaboration between JOFA, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, and Kolech, the Religious Women's Forum, in honor of the 10th biannual conference of Kolech. The conference will take place on the 18th of October 2017 at the International Convention Center in Jerusalem. The conference will discuss various halachic, social, and cultural issues rising at the crossroads between values of gender equality and Judaism, and Kolech hopes to see you there. And now I am honored to have Nechama Goldman Barash with me. And so Nechama teaches rabbinic literature, women in Judaism, Jewish sexual ethics, and halacha and Bible at Pardes, Matan, and Torah Avodah, B'nai Akiva Gap Year program. She made Aliyah from Philadelphia over 20 years ago, went on to study for 3 years in Matan's Advanced Talmud Institute, and finished a master's degree in Talmud at Bar Ilan University. She is a graduate of Nishmat Yoetzat Halacha program and studied for 3 years in Matan's Hilchata program of Advanced Jewish Law. She is an active member of Beit Hillel, and she lives in Gush Etzion with her husband and 4 daughters. Thank you so much for being here, Nechama. It's really such a privilege, and I'm looking forward to learning from you.
Thank you very much, Rivka. I'm going to give one of my favorite shiurim, and it's really an Erev Yom Kippur shiur, but I'm happy to begin giving it. I'm actually happy to be giving it before Rosh Hashanah, because what I'm going to talk about is the process we have to engage in order to mindfully both say I'm sorry and hear I'm sorry from other people. And I think now's a good time to start thinking about that process, rather than Erev Yom Kippur, where we traditionally send out phone calls, WhatsApps, Facebooks, do you Michael me, do you forgive me? And it often becomes very superficial, like kind of let me get the mark longer than list, and the consequence when we don't always take the time to think about what we're doing. So on the source sheet, which I believe Rivka has posted, in the first source, there's a famous quote from Yoma. And the source says something, anyone who's grown up in Orthodoxy is transgressions between man and God, Yom HaKippur procures atonement. So we have this idea that if we manage to make it through Yom Kippur, if we fast, if we pray, then our slate is wiped clean and we start again. And we have another year in which to engage and make mistakes and do things right and do things over. But the Gemara goes on to say, for transgressions between man and his fellow man, Yom Kippurim does not procure atonement until he has pacified his fellow man. And again, that's often taught from a very young age. And you say, oh, right, of course, I have to go say I'm sorry, or I have to go ask for mechila. But really, behind that statement is something far more complex than Erev Yom Kippur remembering to ask for forgiveness. So much so that the Shulchan Aruch, when he codifies the laws about Yom HaKippurim, puts in a detail that is important to notice. What he says on an Orach Chaim Siman Taf Rav Reish Vav Seif Aleph, Averot sheben adam lechavero ein Yom HaKippurim mechaper ad sheyifaisenu. And basically, if you transgress against your fellow man, Yom Kippur does not procure atonement unless you go and pacify your fellow man. Afilu lo hiknito ela b'dvarim. And I love this line, because even if you only insulted him with words, and as I often point out, largely the infractions we do to one another is with words. We insult someone, we annoy someone, we hurt someone, we humiliate someone. Largely it's with words, that we say an obnoxious comment at the wrong time. And so it's not just with words, meaning the vast majority of hurt and humiliation comes from words. And so what do you have to do? Here the Shulchan Aruch says something, and again, it's from the Gemara. If the person is not pacified the first time, and how real is that? Because the truth is, sometimes I regret what I do immediately, but it's too late for me to actually just say I'm sorry, right? So I say I'm sorry one time, and the person says, look, not good enough. I'm not ready to hear it. And then the Shulchan Aruch goes on to say, you have to try 3 more times. And you should take 3 people with you. You have up to 3 times to try to figure out a way to get the person you hurt to listen to you and to be open to forgiving you. What I also like is you bring 3 people with you. Now, 3 is a Beit Din. It's true, it's a rabbinic court. But I'd like to suggest a deeper meaning behind that. The truth is, if we're trying to foster a reconciliation, it takes a village, meaning sometimes you need other people there to mediate to some degree, to hear that you're being authentic and to say to the other person, wait a minute, I hear so-and-so is really being authentic. Don't you want to give him or her a chance? Sometimes we need other people to mediate a reconciliation. And this idea of if it doesn't work a third time, the first time, you should really make sure to bring people with you a second time, a third time. Once 3 times passes, chances are whatever you're doing isn't going to work. Either the person is determined not to forgive you, or you haven't figured out a way to be listened to. You need to rethink what you're doing. But halachically, you've checked, you've done the most you can. 3 times is enough. It's what we call in halacha chazaka. You've given it a try, but maybe you personally have to think about why it's not working. So what I'd like to do is start off with the story, as I said, with that in mind. I'd really like to begin with a story. It's a story in Yoma, Daf Pei Zayin Amid Aleph. And it's a story in which Rav is not mindful of what it means to reconcile. And as I go through the story, I think you'll see the author of the story is brilliant in how he structured the story. And I think we'll be able to relate to it from a close up. Rav had a complaint against a certain butcher. And what I love about the story is it doesn't tell us what the complaint was. And it leaves us to fill in the gap. And I often point out to my class, customers always have complaints against shopkeepers and tradesmen. We're always worried we're going to be cheated. We're always worried they're not giving us the best cut of meat, that our cup of coffee isn't as hot as the next person's. And so sometimes the complaints are justifiable because sometimes we are cheated and sometimes we are given lower quality produce. And so there's a vulnerability in that space between customer and service provider and shopkeeper tradesmen. So we don't know what. We open up with Rav having a complaint. Now, since Rav is the head of the academy in Babylonia in his time, we're on Rav's side. It must be justified. Otherwise, how could Rav have a complaint? At which point I often pause and ask anyone, have you ever worked in a service-based industry? And yes. Are there ever customers that are particularly difficult? And of course, everyone smiles and nods and so on. And so anyone who's been a butcher, butcher, shoemaker, Starbucks barista, will probably be a little suspicious of what Rav's complaint could have been. In all fairness, if I want to justify Rav, it could very well be the butcher has served treif meat and passed it off as kosher. That's also possible. I mean, if I want to legitimize the complaint, it could be it's really a serious complaint because he's the head of the academy. But because the author didn't tell me what it was, I have to assume the complaint itself is not important. And so what happens is, lo atu l'kame, and I love this, it's Erev Yom Kippur, and the butcher has not come to seek reconciliation, which is what he's supposed to do, right? The Gemara tells us, you have to seek reconciliation. B'malei Yom Kippura, Amarihu, Ezel Aina L'Fayusele. So Rav now says something, and again, if we're paying attention, we say, something doesn't seem quite right. I'm going to go seek out the butcher and facilitate the reconciliation. It says with the Fayusele, which means I'll reconcile with him. But remember, Rav's the one who has the complaint. So what it suggests is Rav is going to show up and basically say, hey, it's Erev Yom Kippur, Mr. Butcher. You need to say you're sorry, right? Because I know that's what you need to do, and I want to make sure you do it, and then we can put a check on the box that I've meicheled you, which is what I have to do. Okay, but I think anyone who knows what happens when there's a rupture knows that reconciliation has to be, it has to be two-directional. Okay, so he goes out, and he's on his way. Pagabe Rav Huna. Now Rav Huna becomes the omniscient narrator, and he bumps into Rav Huna, and Rav Huna says, Lehecha ka'azomar, where are you going, Rav? And Rav says, L'fayuse planya, I'm going to reconcile with Ploni, with so-and-so. And now Rav Huna says something which shows that he's omniscient in many ways as as the character in the middle of the story, but that Rav Huna recognizes something Rav does not recognize. He basically says, Azil Abba lemiktel nafsha. Abba, and that's the affectionate term students in the academy use for Rav, which again, a teacher very much has a father role in the academy towards his students. So he's Abba to his students, but he says Abba is going to kill somebody, which again, we're going to find out someone is going to die, spoiler alert, okay? But it's interesting that when he hears Rav is going to reconcile or facilitate a reconciliation with someone or demand a reconciliation, Rav Huna says, this is not going to end well. It's going to end tragically. And is it because he knows Rav is not particularly good at reconciliations? Is it because he sees Rav striding down the street, Erev Yom Kippur, determined to seek reconciliation, and he understands that that's not the way reconciliation can be sought? It's not clear. Again, what's beautiful in the story is we bring whatever we want to the story, but the language of Pagabe Rav Huna, he literally bumps into Rav Huna. He's so tunnel vision going towards the butcher, and he's determined that this is going to happen, and Rav Huna understands it's not going to happen. Someone's going to die. There's going to be a death. And I often say, what a beautiful metaphor, a death of a relationship. Meaning, in the case of the story, there's really going to be a death because it's a story. But I think you really could take it in a certain direction and say, if you're not mindful of how you're saying you're sorry or how you're asking for how you're accepting forgiveness, the relationship can really be ruptured permanently. Okay. So basically, he stands up and he walks in and he stands there. And what's amazing is he walks into the butcher's shop and he doesn't say anything. He's just standing there. And now the author gives us a tantalizing little visual. The butcher is flaying an animal head, and one imagines with a very big cleaver, which requires a lot of attention. You don't want to mess around when you're holding a big cleaver in your hand. He lifted up his eyes and he looked. Amarle abaat zil leitle milta bahadach. He now looks up and he says, your Abba, again, it's almost a mockery of the affectionate term Rav Huna used. I know who you are. They call you Abba. Get out of my butcher shop. Go. I don't have a word to say to you. Now, suddenly, as a reader, I have to stop because it seems like the butcher is really angry at Rav. It seems like the butcher has a complaint against Rav, so much so that he essentially wants to throw Rav out of the butcher shop. He doesn't want Rav coming in, which makes me go back to the story and wonder who has a complaint against whom, right? There are often two sides in a rupture. Is it possible that Rav is driving him crazy about his hashkacha? Is it possible that Rav is a difficult customer and makes comments about the quality of the meat? We don't know. Again, the beauty of the story is the author allows us to engage with it where we will. That I would say the butcher's aggressive response to Rav standing there as if, here I am, you can say you're sorry now. Okay, I'm here. Erev Yom Kippur, here, we only have 2 hours to go. I'll accept your apology. And the butcher totally throws that out of the water. Like, no, I'm not apologizing and I want you out of my shop, which makes me wonder who's in the wrong here. I don't know. And then the tragedy happens, the butcher being very distracted. And it seems to me from the language, really upset, like not just distracted, but, internal turmoil coming outward, like really just thrown by Rav showing up in his shop Erev Yom Kippur. So basically a bone flies up from the head of the animal, it hits him in the throat, and kills him. So again, there's a lovely, literary idea that he's shechted, right? He's hit in the throat and he dies. And it's a story, and you could decide, well, of course, that must be God punishing the butcher. But I prefer to read it in a more, a way that's not as clear, a less clear way. I think that Rav Huna was right. Rav Huna was right in understanding that the way Rav was going to ask for or demand forgiveness, demand an apology, was not going to end well. And one of the things I came to this week when I taught this story is he could have brought Rav Huna with him. In fact, we know from the Shulchan Aruch, which is also based on the Gemara, that you're really supposed to bring someone with you when you ask for forgiveness. And if Rav is trying to demand forgiveness, why didn't he bring the 3 people with him, right? The 3 Shalosh Anashim. And Rav Huna, even something like sending Rav Huna in earlier to say, Rav wants a word with you, might have changed the whole story. And so I think this is a story about a fracture that cannot be mended. With death, the story ends. Rav will not have another chance, neither will the butcher. It's not a happy ending regardless of how you look at it. Even if you think the butcher had it coming, it still means that Rav never got his I'm sorry, and Rav never really explored what the complaint, what was going on here. And so the end of the story leaves us at a dead end. I mean, there will not be a reconciliation. And Rav Huna was right. Rav Huna called this. Okay, so that's story number one. And what I'd like to do is contrast it to story number two, because I think story number one is mindless reconciliation, and story number two is the exact opposite. It's mindful reconciliation, and it comes from a very interesting place. Okay. It's from the Bavli, Mesechet Shabbat. Tanu Rabbanan, Hadam Chavero L'Kaf Zchut, Danin Oto D'Zchut. So we have one of these, again, one of these sayings that we all teach. We teach our children from a young age. One who judges his neighbor favorably is himself judged favorably. And of course, we say that and we teach it, but in reality, it's very hard to do. In other words, when I'm cut off at, by another driver who cuts into my lane, I very rarely think, oh, the guy, maybe someone's sick, maybe he's late for an appointment. I often get very frustrated, largely because I live in Israel and people cut me all the time. And so it's very frustrating. And I tend to think, why do they think their time is more valuable than my time? But the truth is, sometimes I cut people off. Why? Either because I haven't paid attention that the lane ends, or sometimes I'm late and I really do need to get to work. And so it's not illegal. It's just not a very nice thing to do. And so I think if I use even, a small example like that, we very rarely judge other people favorably, even though we want to be judged favorably. And here's a story that's going to show someone who has done the work needed to carry this through. So we have a certain man who came down from the north to the south of Israel, hired himself out to a balabayit, to an employer, and has been working there for 3 years, obviously to make money. And so what happens is, Erev Yom Kippurim, Amar lan ten li schari ve'elech ve'azon et ishti u'banai. He basically says, 3 years is up. I feel like I've earned enough money based on whatever contract we had. I'd like to be paid. I'd like to go home. Erev Yom Kippur. And I'll just say, Erev Yom Kippur in all of these stories is often a time where people either seek reconciliation or go home after a lengthy journey away. And I think because it's a time where you're going to stand in judgment before God. And if you're going to stand in judgment, you want those closest to you to be next to you so God can remember them. Like you want to be judged as a unit with your family, with your community, with your yeshiva, with your nation. There's something about, if I'm going to be judged, let the judgment fall on all of us so that, we're remembered together. And so he goes home Erev Yom Kippur. He says, basically, it's time for me to go. Amar lo en li ma'od. His employer then does something that's really astonishing. And I'll just remind you, keep in mind, they've lived together for 3 years, right? The employee has been living with his employer for 3 years and presumably knows his employer pretty well. They've gone through a lot of time together. And his employer then says to him, I have no money. Amar lo ten li peirot. Give me some fruit, some dates, some nuts, something I can bring home. My salary's worth in fruit. That way I can resell it. Amar lo ein li. No, I don't have any. Ten li karka. Give me land. Give me an orchard, and then I can sell it and bring home money and feed my family. Ein li. Ten li be'ema. Give me some animals. Ein li. I don't have any. Ten li karit v'ksatot. Give me a pillow, a pillowcase, linen, something. And his employer says, ein li. So that is a moment. That's a rupture. That's a moment where I think many of us would just completely lose it. What do you mean 3 years? I'm going to bring my kids nothing, my wife nothing. How am I going to face them? Right? So he throws his empty pillowcase, his empty sack behind him over his shoulders, and he trudges home and he's depressed. But not a word is exchanged. He does not say anything to his employer. You can only imagine how pleased his wife was after 3 years away that they still weren't going to be able to buy the oven or the refrigerator she'd been waiting for 3 years, or even just bring home food, right? They've probably been living off the charity pot and they're trying, they want to repay it however they've been living. Again, we fill that in. I'm filling in the story, right? That's the beauty of stories. לאחר הרגל נטל בעל הבית שכרו בידו, ועמו משווה 3 חמורים, אחד של מאכל ואחד של משתה ואחד של מיני מגדים. והלך לו לביתו. So basically the balabayit, the employer, after the regel. And I'll just write it. The regel is Sukkot, so he waits till after Shmini Atzeret, right? So it's a good 10 days to 2 weeks until he makes the trip all the way up north. And he comes with the money, 3 donkeys laden with goodies, food and drink and delicacies. And he comes up to the employee's home. Okay, so that's movement. If I'm looking for movement in the story, I have physical movement from the south to the north. And he's not only repaying him with money, he's bringing all sorts of extras on the donkeys. And basically he does something, and this is where the story really, the turning point. Halach lo lebeito, he went to his house. Achar she'achlo v'shato achlu v'shatu natan lo scharo. So what I love is he sits down to break bread with his employee. And I just want to, if you're thinking, oh, okay, that's nice. What that means? You're talking about an employee and an employer, right? It's not clear that they ever ate together, right? Often employers, I like Downton Abbey, right? All of even the beloved help, the butler and the housekeeper who they're very close with, always eats below stairs. Meaning employers and employees do not usually eat together, even if they're in the field. Usually there's a distance between them, right? It's very familiar, very intimate to eat together. And the first thing that happens before he even puts money on the table, he sits down and he eats. And I'll say the motion is in 2 directions. He comes into a house far below his station in life, right? He comes into his employee's home, which is a real movement downward for him. But the employee lets him in, right? This is a moment where the employee could have come out and said, okay, give me my money and get out of here, right? And you might even think justifiably, meaning what is this? The guy's been 2 weeks already, has gone by. He had to go through Sukkot without his wages. We don't know how he's managed, what his wife and his children are thinking. And this guy shows up at his house. Very nice. It's nice that you brought me donkeys, but you've really humiliated me and hurt me. Instead, there's almost this, movement in, as I said, 2-directional movement. One walks into the house and sits down at the table. The other one lets him in, and they eat together, which is establishing a close, it's intimate. There's intimacy there, and they care about each other, and they first break bread, and only then he pays him. And I would suggest, again, the employer could have shown up, slammed the money down on the table, said, here, I brought you a few extra goodies, now we're even, and turned around and gone home. No, that's not what happens here. There was a really big rupture. Meaning that moment where he didn't pay him anything, Erev Yom Kippur, was a terrible moment, and we're going to find out what happened. The storyteller does not keep us in suspense. But the way that they came together meant both of them were ready for that moment. And we'll see what happens. Again, even the fact that he comes into his house, he sits down with him, shows there's a lot of mindfulness, a lot of thoughtfulness in this, of being in the moment in this reconciliation. Okay, and so now they begin to speak. Now the dialogue opens up. The employer now turns to the employee. Well, when I told you I didn't have any money, what did you suspect me of? Amarti, Shama Parkmataya Bizol Nizdam Nalacha. Maybe you found some cheap merchandise, some really good deal came in from China, right? You couldn't afford to miss it out, and you couldn't afford to miss buying it at that, bottom basement prices, and you used up all your cash. Maybe you genuinely didn't have any money. Well, what happened when I told you, when I said I didn't have any cattle, any animals, and you and I both know I have a lot of animals, what did you think? And so then the employee beautifully says, I thought maybe you rented them out to someone else. He says, well, when I told you I didn't have any peyrot, any fruit, what did you think? I thought maybe you hadn't tithed them that yet, and it was Erev Yom Kippur, you weren't going to have time. So again, you couldn't give me tevel, I understood that. And when I said to you that I didn't have any linens, anything, not a pillowcase, what did you think? And here the employee really reveals how deeply he's been watching his employer for 3 years. He says, maybe you took a vow to heaven, vowing all of your earthly possessions to God, to the temple, and so they really didn't belong to you. Now, I would say 2 things at this point. I would pause and say, it shows that the goodness and the integrity of the employee. But I would also like to point out, he's been living with this man for 3 years. It could very well be he's modeling himself on the employer, that he's seen the employer judge other people favorably. And so that has allowed him to judge his employer favorably. Like there is a real relationship here. And he's taking out from inside all of his powers of judging favorably, of saying, well, it could have been this and it could have been that. And I know you, I've lived with you for 3 years. It really was inconceivable to me that you would cheat me. And now we find out why the employer now shares with him a very personal piece of information, which shows again throughout this whole process of reconciliation, trust has been building, kind of a safe space has been created. And let's see what happens next, because now he tells him something that you wouldn't just share with anybody. And what he says is, ha'avodah kachaya. That's exactly what happened. Hadarti kol nichsai b'shvil Horkenes b'ni shelo asak b'Torah. Now, Horkenes is a Greek name. When he says what's happened is, I took a vow when I found out my son Horkenes was not engaged with Torah, which I'll now take a step further. He Hellenized. His son became a Hellenized Jew. He assimilated. At that moment, when the employer found out that his son was rejecting all of his values, all of his belief systems, he did what many people do in a moment of tremendous pain and anger. He said, by the word of God, you will not get a penny of my money as inheritance. I'm vowing everything to heaven, right? He basically, it's a way of making sure his son doesn't inherit, except who is he cheated out of his wages? His faithful, good employee who is following in his derech, right? And so then he has to, it's not enough that he recognizes this. In order to get out of the vow, the last piece of the story is really astonishing. He has to go to his companions in the south, the story tells us. In other words, that's where the Beit Din is. Right? That's where Rabbi Akiva went to fill the world with Torah after his 24,000 students died, according to legend. And you have the 5 students that he took, 5 or 7 students. It was in the south. He went to the south to rebuild Torah. He has to go and admit to his colleagues, to his friends, to his neighbors, to these learned men, to the Rashi Yeshiva, that his son is now Hyrcanus and has gone off the derech, and he needs them to absolve the vow. In other words, he has to humiliate himself. He has to humble himself. Many people want to hide embarrassing information about family members, but he now has to expose himself to the great sages, the people, and basically say, I failed, which of course, it doesn't mean he failed, but he failed as a father. He feels he failed. And he's doing this because he realizes how much he's wronged his employee. And he now shares this with his employee. He didn't have to give him all this information. He could have said, yeah, I took a vow and it took a few weeks till I could have gotten absolved. Because they've really grown together in this process, in this journey, and there's been really consideration throughout, and they've listened to one another, they're much closer by the end of the story. He's treating him like a son, meaning it's become a very intimate, even more intimate relationship. They ate together, they had a dialogue, and then he shares with him something personally humiliating and very, very painful. And then he gives him a blessing. That's the last piece. Just as you judge me favorably, may God judge you favorably. Again, he gives him a beautiful bracha. And so that story, in contrast to the Rav and the butcher story, really, I think, is a wonderful example of how, if you really care about the person you're seeking forgiveness from, then you really have to put into work into the process of what that space is going to look like. And it's not just going to be, notice, nowhere does anyone say, I'm sorry, or I forgive you, or and so on. It's much more subtle than that. And as a result, it's much more powerful than that, right? They listen to one another. They wait for one another. And so that's where the reconciliation takes place. I want to look at another story with Rav, it'll tie us nicely back to the butcher, and then one more story where we see reconciliation done well. Okay, the next story is also Masechet Yoma, more or less in the same area as the butcher story. Anyone who's a teacher will recognize how Rav, will understand Rav, but will also understand why he did not handle it well. Rav had a psik sidra kame de Rebbe. No, that's not where I want. Oh yeah, sorry, kame de Rebbe. Ayel ata Rav Chia hadar l'reisha. Rav is basically teaching his big, Gemara Shiur. He's teaching it before the rabbis, Rebbe, everyone's there and listening to him. Kame de Rebbe, right? Before the different stages of the academy. And Rav Chia comes in late. Now, the problem is for any teacher, when a student comes in late, that often the student will not be able to follow the trajectory of the class, because in the opening, we often set out important information. If you walk in the middle, you can't always follow what's going on. And so Rav Chia comes in late, and Rav started over. Bar Kapara came in late, and Rav started over. Rav Shimon ben Rebbe came in late, and Rav started over. So 3 times Rav has started again, in order to accommodate students who are late. And I think we all know that there are legitimate reasons to be late. The baby was crying when I left the house. I had an upset stomach and I had to run to the bathroom. Sometimes I overslept. Sometimes it's not justified. It doesn't matter. He doesn't ask any questions. 3 times he starts over. The problem is, on this day, Rav Chanina Bar Chama came in also late. And at this point, Rav loses it. And what basically happens is Rav says, what, I'm gonna have to start again? Not starting again, right? Now, we've all been in that space. We've been in that space as parents, as teachers, as maybe counselors, where you're patient the first 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 times a camper, a student, a child does something provocative or annoying or something that pushes our buttons, and we pat ourselves each time on the back. I didn't lose my temper. That was great. I held it in. And then there's the 4th time or the 5th time, and we lose it. And it doesn't matter to that student, camper, child that you held it in for 3 times. They don't care. They don't appreciate it, and all they know is my mother yelled at me and it wasn't fair. She didn't yell at my brother when he did the same thing. And the Rebbe didn't yell at the 3 students came in late. Everyone's telling me the other students didn't get yelled at. And you've created a rupture, a situation that at this point doesn't really matter that you feel good that you controlled yourself for 3 times. The 4th time, everything falls apart. And what we find out is Rav Hanina is really insulted. It was embarrassing. He walks in late. Now everyone's going to come over to him and say, oh my God, what happened? Why were you late? Now, maybe again, he was in the bathroom. Maybe again, a fight with his wife. He now has to start explaining himself. This was not a good situation. It happens. It's very real. It's what I love about this story. Just like Rav and the Butcher. It happens. We have complaints against tradespeople. We come in late and someone rebukes us. It happens. But what happens is Rav knows he needs to apologize. And he goes 13 Erevei Yom Kippurim. That's an astonishing number of Erevei Yom Kippurim to go say, I'm sorry. Yud Gimel Midot, right? The 13 attributes. He only needs to go 3. My question is, what is he doing between the Yom Kippurs? Is he trying to facilitate a reconciliation, to apologize maybe on Hanukkah or Pesach? Rav Erev Yom Kippur knows he has to say, I'm sorry. So he goes Erev Yom Kippur, but something isn't working because he goes 13 times and Rav Hanina won't accept his apology. So again, we can also say that Rav Hanina maybe should have moved, but the story isn't about Rav Hanina. I feel, again, the lens of this story is looking at Rav. And if you've gone 3 times and it hasn't worked, you either need to rethink how you're asking for forgiveness, or you need to give up and say this relationship isn't going to be repaired. And so again, a sad story, a story where there is no reconciliation. This is within the academy between sages, and we see how fragile it is. Sometimes when I insult someone, I'm never going to be able to undo that. It's never going to get better. I'm not going to be able to trust that person again. And so I can't hear his I'm sorry. Something's wrong in the story if after 13 Yom Kippurim, Rav Hanina is still hurt. The next story I want to look at is source number 5 on the source sheet. Oh, no, I'm sorry. No. I'm going to skip. I need to skip because we don't have enough time. It's source number 7. Okay. It's in Eruvin Nun Daled Amid Aleph. It's also an Erev Yom Kippur story. Rava Bared Rav Yosef Bar Chama, Havale Milta the Rav Yosef Bahate. Rav Yosef had a grievance against Rava, the son of Rav Yosef Bar Chama. Again, we don't know what the grievance was. So this is not tradespeople. This is in the academy. In the case of Rav and Rav Hanina, we know what the grievance was, right? He erupted. He embarrassed Rav Hanina. Here we don't know. Rav Yosef has a grievance against Rava. We don't know what it is. Erev Yom Kippurim, Kimata Mada Yom Kippurim, Ezel V'Faisa. He says, basically, I'm going to go pacify him. So Rava takes it upon himself to go ask for forgiveness, Erev Yom Kippur, from Rav Yosef. And now the story, again, is an astonishingly, I think, beautiful moment, beautiful part of the story. He goes to Rav Yosef's house, and he finds the servant, the attendant of the Jewish attendant, as you're going to see, because the Jewish attendant is mixing wine for Rav Yosef. And in the time of the Talmud, wine was very concentrated. So you didn't drink wine straight up like we do from the bottle. You would add water. And it would be very particular how much you wanted your wine diluted. And I often say, look, I'm a coffee drinker. My husband is not. He does not know how to make me a good cup of coffee. Largely because, number one, he doesn't drink coffee. And number two, I'm very particular about how much coffee. And it's not a measurement I can give him, meaning he's an engineer. He wants precise measurements. It's 2 heaping tablespoons, but that's not helpful because he doesn't really understand the nuance there of, how to make the cup of coffee exactly the way I want it. So for an attendant to know how Rav Yosef wants his wine mixed is a lot of practice, trial and error, and eventually getting it right and understanding this is the way to do it. When Rava walks in, he says to the attendant, give it to me, I'll mix it, which tells us 2 things. Number one, He's willing to act as attendant, lower himself to the job of attendant. And number two, it suggests he knows how to mix Rav Yosef's wine, right? That he's done it before, that there's intimacy there. Okay. He gave it to him and the latter duly mixed it. So he mixes his wine. Now Rav Yosef is blind. And he takes the cup of wine that's presented to him and he tastes it and he says something. He says, this mixing tastes like that of Rava, the son of Rav Yosef bar Chama. And now, because he's blind, it could be he heard him, he heard his footsteps, he smelled him. There are a lot of, but when he says this wine tastes like Rava, it says, first of all, it could be Rava has a unique way of mixing his wine. Again, a spritz of lemon at the end. Who knows, right? He adds something. But it's an intimate moment where one offers the wine and one takes the wine. He doesn't even see Rava. He senses Rava. He knows Rava is in the drink, right? Sometimes when our grandmother prepares us the chicken soup, it might taste literally like someone else's chicken soup. We taste Bubby in the chicken soup, right? It's an intimacy. There's a love. There's a feeling there. And so he tastes Rava in the wine, and then he says, "I am here," which really to me is Hineni. I am here. In the Aramaic, it's Anahu, but really it's Hineni, I'm here. And then Rav Yosef says to him, don't even sit down. Explain to me the following verses, which to me is, again, let's pick up the conversation where we left it off. I remember the moment, what we were learning, the moment we had the rupture, and I've been waiting for you because I've never fully understood these psukim. And they just pick up where they left off because there's been movement, because one came in, brought the wine, did a gesture that showed reconciliation, the other one accepted it, and then they pick up, obviously not exactly where they left off. The psukim are actually from the end of Bamidbar, the journeys of Bnei Yisrael, which again is very metaphorical, right? They were on a journey and now they're continuing on their journey. But this language of, don't even take off your coat, I have to ask you something, right? I've been waiting for you. Where have you been? And they just continue learning Torah together, which is where their relationship is. Do I have time for one more story, Rivka? Yeah, okay. So I'm just checking. Okay, so the last story I want to do is one more, and I think it's a reading I want to share with you. It's a reading of Professor David Henschke from Bar Ilan University, and I think it's a very different kind of mindfulness we sometimes have to do when things go wrong. It's the last source in the packet. It's Mishnah Rosh Hashanah. For shortness of time, I'm going to paraphrase the background, and then I just want to read a few lines in Mishnah Tet. The story is like this. Witnesses would come to declare the new moon, and in the second chapter of Rosh Hashanah, there's a bit of suspicion. How reliable are witnesses, right? Because we know people make mistakes, human error. And Rabban Gamliel accepts witnesses who his colleagues think are not good witnesses, are flawed witnesses. Now, I'll just remind everyone that we're talking about the difference of a day, meaning months are either going to be 30 days or 31 days. It's not like they could be 25 days or 38 days, right? It's a 1 day difference, how long a month is going to be. And so, nonetheless, it affects our holidays, right? It's very significant because it affects what day we keep Hanukkah and Yom Kippur and Pesach and so on and so forth. So it matters. And Rabban Gamliel, in some of the Mishnayot, there's murmuring going on in the academy that Rabban Gamliel is accepting false witnesses. Okay, that's more or less the background of the story. And Rabbi Yoshua, in the first paragraph of the source, basically, when Rabbi Dosa ben Horkana says, it's like a woman who gives birth and her belly is still between her teeth. In other words, the woman's still pregnant, so how could she have given birth? It's a real critique of Rabban Gamliel's checking the witnesses. All Rabbi Yoshua says is, I approve of your words. I hear what you're saying. I agree with you. Now, the problem is Rabbi Yoshua is a very senior sage in the academy, and this is going to threaten Rabban Gamliel's authority. Rabban Gamliel is the head of the academy, and potentially it could lead to anarchy. Okay, it could lead to a complete disruption in the way the Beit Midrash works. The Beit Midrash has to work with rules, with protocol, and Rabban Gamliel as the head has to maintain a certain integrity of the protocol. And at this point, there's murmuring going on regarding Rabban Gamliel. So Rabban Gamliel then does something very drastic. He sends Rabbi Yoshua a message, and he says to him, I want you to come with your walking stick and your money on the day you think is going to be Yom Kippur. Now, I'm going to pause to explain. Rabbi Yoshua thinks Rabban Gamliel has called the month too early, a day too early. So when Rabbi Gamliel thinks it's Yom Kippur, Rabbi Yoshua thinks it's only the 9th of Tishrei, which means Rabbi Yoshua is not going to keep Yom Kippur this year. That's what this means. Because the day Rabbi Gamliel thinks is Yom Kippur is not Yom Kippur for Rabbi Yoshua, so he's not going to fast. And the next day when he thinks it's Yom Kippur, Rabbi Gamliel is ordering him to come with his walking stick and his money. Okay, so Rabbi Yoshua is not going to have Yom Kippur this year. That's the upshot. That's the nafka meaning here. And it's a very strong message Rabbi Gamliel is sending, and he's sending it to Rabbi Yoshua, who again is one of the senior sages in the academy. Not to Rabbi Dosa, who's the one who really incited the whole thing by making some sarcastic comment about pregnant women. Okay, it shows, by the way, that Rabbi Dosa has not seen women the day after they give birth, and sometimes we still look like we haven't yet given birth the day after, because that's the way the stomach muscles stretch. So I like it that a woman still looks pregnant the next day, and you're like, yeah, that happens. Okay, be careful of the comments you make, Rabbi Dosa. Okay. So basically, I now want to pick up in the Hebrew, because there's a nuance here that the English does not catch. Yoshua does not immediately go. Halach u'matza'o Rabbi Akiva Mesar. So basically, Rabbi Akiva, who often plays the mediator in these stories, he's the one who consoles rabbis who are being either thrown out of the academy or challenged. He finds him very upset. Now, take a look, if you're following in the Hebrew, I just, Amar lo. Now, the question is, who is speaking to whom? Now, in this translation, obviously, Rabbi Akiva speaks to Rabbi Yoshua. But the truth is, it's not clear. And it's possible Rabbi Yoshua is speaking to Rabbi Akiva. And I think that's, again, Professor Henschke's suggestion. And I think it changes the entire story, because Rabbi Yoshua is going to justify what Rabbi Gamliel did. You can read it two ways. Either Rabbi Akiva justifies Rabbi Gamliel, or Rabbi Yoshua justifies Rabbi Gamliel to Rabbi Akiva, which is a totally different kind of processing. I either listen to someone tell me why I have to submit, or I myself work through it by explaining the reason Rabbi Gamliel was right. Okay, and so I want to read it that way, because I think it's a more powerful reading. Because I think sometimes people tell us, you really need to, you have to, you ought to. But when I say, oh, I really need to, I have to, I ought to, when it's something I don't really want to do, I'm more likely to do it, right? I'm internalizing it. So let's see what he says. Yesh li lilmod shekol ma she'asa Rabban Gamliel asui. Even that yesh li lilmod, I have to learn. Shekol ma she'asa Rabban Gamliel asui. Shene'amar ela moedei Hashem mikrei kodesh asher tikru otam. Basically, what Rabbi Yoshua does is justify Rabbi Akiva. Instead of reading it that Rabbi Akiva says, I can prove it to you, he says, I can prove it to me. I can prove it to me that Rabban Gamliel is right. Because there's a pasuk that says, Ela moedei Hashem mikrei kodesh asher tikru otam b'ma'adam. The follow our God's appointed holy days that you will designate. And we understand from that, this is a famous drash, ben bizmanam ben shelo bizmanam. In other words, even if we make mistakes, God has given us the ability to sanctify the new moon. And in that ability comes mistakes, because people make mistakes. And so out loud, he's remembering the famous drasha, it's in the Sifrei, that yes, even if there are mistakes made, we determine the month, even though it may throw off the holidays by a day. Okay. Eli moadot shelo bizmanan. Those are our moadim, that God gave us human determined time. In the holidays, God is a partner in determining time. God determines Shabbat, right? Every 7 days is Shabbat. But we determine the new moon. So we determine when Yom Kippur is going to be, and Sukkot is going to be, and Hanukkah and Pesach, and so on and so forth. That is something we share. God gives us the ability to determine holy time, even if they're at the wrong times, right? Even if we make a mistake. That is why God gave it to Bnei Israel. Okay. He's not yet ready to go yet. Notice there's going to be another conversation. Who does he go to? Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinus. So now he goes to Rabbi Dosa ben Horkinus, who's the one who started the whole thing with the pregnant belly, right, in the previous Mishnah. Amar lo. Now again, it doesn't say who's speaking to whom, and I'd like to use the reading that he continues to talk out loud to himself, to Rabbi Dosa. Rabbi Dosa is the audience. And what does he say? Im ba'in anu ladun achar beit dino shel Rabban Gamliel, tzrichin anu ladun achar kol beit din ubeit din she'aman miyemot Moshe va'ad achshav. Shene'amar v'yal Moshe v'Aaron nadav v'avihu b'shivim mizivnei Yisrael, v'lama lo nitparshu shmatan shel zkenim, ela v'lamed shekol shlosha v'shlosha shamdu beit din al Yisrael, hareu kebeit dino shel Moshe. He's talking to himself. He's drawing on his years of learning Torah, and he says, the truth is, if we question Rabban Gamliel's authority, we're going to question every Beit Din. There has to be a process and a protocol. There has to be a head of the Beit Din. If I question Rabban Gamliel, I might as well go back and question Moshe, because we have in Shemot this idea that Moshe went up with Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, and the 70 elders. Why weren't the names of the elders specified? To show that every group of three that creates a Beit Din, that's like the Beit Din of Moshe and Aaron. Again, he's talking to himself. He's come up with two reasons. One pasuk from Vayikra that God shares with man holy time, that we appoint the holy time. The second is, if we challenge every Beit Din, there's no end to this. If I challenge Rabbi Gamliel, I might as well go back and challenge Moshe and Aaron. And that's also learned from his repository of wisdom of Torah. He's able to draw on that in this moment. And only then he goes to Rabban Gamliel. So let's see what happens, because the end is also very beautiful. But at this point, he has essentially worked through it. He has processed it. He is aware of what he has to do, and he's used his knowledge of Torah to get him there. He's used psukim from Vayikra and from Shemot and drashot of his colleagues in order to get there, and he's ready to do it. And so what does he do? He takes his staff, he takes his money. Only now does he go. He travels all the way to Yavne. He goes to Rabban Gamliel on the day that he thinks is Yom Kippur. And the story could have ended there, because that's really the end of the story. Except that there's a last line. Amad Rabban Gamliel v'nashko al rosho. And Rabban Gamliel doesn't just accept essentially this, the movement from Rabbi Yeshua to Rabban Gamliel. Rabban Gamliel now gets up and kisses him on the head, which again, a very intimate gesture. A sign that he recognizes how hard it was for Rabbi Yeshua to do what he just did. And he's not just going to sit there and say, oh, good, you came, put the money in the staff there, you can go now. I mean, it wasn't just about, wielding his authority. He basically says to him then, Bo b'shalom, Rabbi v'talmidi. He honors him. He says, come in peace, my Rebbe and my student. Because Rabbi Yeshua, as I said, is one of the senior sages. He's not a lightweight. And he now says to him, Rebbe v'talmidi, Rebbe v'chachma, you actually know more wisdom than I do, and I know that. Even when I asked you to come, I knew that. And talmidi shekibalta dvarai, and my student, because you accepted the lesson I taught you. And that's where the story ends. Because again, the movement has to be in two directions. It has to be both forward, both parties have to recognize the Herculean effort we sometimes have to make to submit ourselves, to humiliate ourselves, to pick up the phone and say, I'm sorry, to accept the forgiveness. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of inner work, and it's a lot of processing. And this last story really showed us that, again, I wanted to read it in a way that Rabbi Yeshua, to his colleagues, talks to himself and justifies Rabban Gamliel before he goes. And I think that's another piece that should be taken into consideration. Sometimes we just have to keep talking to ourselves in order to get to the space where we can say, I'm sorry. Do you forgive me? I forgive you. Anyway, I want to wish us a lot of reconciliations and not a lot of ruptures this Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. A lot of learning Torah, and may it be a blessed and happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nechama. Thank you for those beautiful words of Torah. I know I'm always thinking about asking for forgiveness, and also asking for others to seeking forgiveness from others this time of year, and those were really enlightening and inspiring stories. So thank you so much for sharing. I always enjoy learning from you and hearing your shiurim, and I hope that all the rest of our viewers had a good experience as well. So thank you again, Nechama, and to everyone watching, don't miss the next shiur in this series on Monday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time with Dr. Aaron Lieb-Smokler. And also keep an eye out for the other shiurim in this series. So, ksiva v'chatima tova, and have a great day, everyone.